Trust me when I tell you, it took a lot of restraint today not to talk about Rogers the Musical for the entire episode, because I'm a theater geek at heart, as well as a film geek. But don't worry, I did not talk about Rogers the Musical the entire episode, but we definitely did talk about it. So you're still good. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I'm very pleased to have with me today Hawkeye Season 1 Director Rhys Thomas. He did episodes 1, 2, and the finale. So there is a lot to talk about, and this is going to be a spoiler-specific episode, but we start spoiler-free, so I will make a very clear spoiler announcement once we get into the spoilers. But, you know, I really enjoyed Hawkeye Season 1, and there was a lot of great stuff to talk about what it took to direct this and to set the visual style for the series and so many other things. And Rhys was a great interview, so I know you'll dig this episode. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I just wanted to remind you that this episode is sponsored by Coverfly.com. If you're a screenwriter who's looking to get your work out there, you'll love Coverfly because they curate the best screenwriting talent discovery programs all in one place. At Coverfly.com, you could submit your script to writing fellowships, labs, competitions, and festivals, and track the status of your submission through your Coverfly Writer dashboard. Also, they're an incredible source for helping connect great scripts and writers with industry professionals. To date, hundreds of screenwriters have met their manager or agent through Coverfly.com. And these writers have gone on to write for Hollywood companies, including Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So if you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished script, be sure to check out Coverfly.com. And speaking of other things to dig while you're surfing around online, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine. We just published our new issue, our winter issue. It has a Dune cover. There is a lot of great stuff in there. And we even add to our issues after we publish. You know, if you've never read us before, you could read the free issue at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you want to see what's inside, you could check out our table of contents in either of those places, or you could read our entirely free issue to test drive us. And after you test drive us, if you decide you like what we have to offer, I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I'm offering you coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory. So look, it really means a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our conversation about Hawkeye Season 1 and what it took to direct it with today's director, Rhys Thomas. It's good to see you. You know, it's Wednesday and the finale just went live and I absolutely loved it. And I think you did a fantastic job, as did Jonathan and the whole team. So kudos to you on that.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, and we're gonna start spoiler free, and we'll get into spoilers. But I just want to give everybody a baseline for you. To my knowledge, for breaking in, which we'll get to in a second, I just want to know what made you want to decide to become a director. At what point in your life did you know that directing was something really important to you?
Oh, that's a very good question. It creeped up on me. I think I was always interested in film, not as a craft initially, just as a regular visitor to a video shop in my local town. And yeah, I just thought it was the coolest place, and just set my sights on working there. That was my first step. And then I discovered that I got into special effects. I discovered a book at the library about ILM when I was about 11 or so, and felt like I'd stumbled upon some crazy secret, and I carried that book around with me and sort of displayed it publicly with me because I felt like I really had some insider knowledge, and I decided I wanted to work in visual effects was my initial thing, and then I grew up in Wales where film is very far away from your everyday reality.
But wait, if you grew up in Wales, that means that you're by the village from TV's The Prisoner. So
yes,
you had something great, really real nearby.
Yeah, and there was actually a museum dedicated to props from the Prisoner that I have a weird fuzzy memory of going to, that I had to verify with my parents that it actually happened, but it did.
I absolutely love The Prisoner. Anybody that likes good genre television, now that you're done watching Hawkeye, when you're looking for the next thing, make sure to check out The Prisoner.
So no, it was really roundabout. I went through a phase where I spent most of my teens wanting to be an actor because that felt accessible and I could do it. I didn't know about film school or anything, and I went to university thinking I was going to be an actor, and then while there, realized I wasn't quite as competitive as the other actors, but yes, still had this itch of film, and so I started making really pretentious video art in college, and kind of melding live performance with film. That was kind of the thing that that was the beginnings of it, and our department had a Media 100 editing system that a professor of mine bought as part of his research grant, and I sort of commandeered it and learned how to use it, which, at the time it was a very expensive system. Anyway, it trickled, and then I went through a road of production at Saturday Night Live. When I got out of college, I started as a PA, worked my way up, and
actually, let's talk about that for a second, because it's always interesting to hear breaking in stories. And you did shorts for Saturday Night Live, and you were directing them, which is a cool thing to do, and you don't get to do that just by PAing. So tell us about that route of when you got your first break going from PA to director, because that's a major leap for anybody.
But although there was a bit in the middle where I was the line producer. I essentially came up through production. I went from PA to production coordinator. My first year as production coordinator, the line producer that I was working for sort of informed me that he was going to have a change of career and become an editor, and essentially volunteered to train me so I could replace him. So it was a very sort of magic moment of timing, and then. I did that for about 7 years for the longtime film director Jim Signorelli, who had been the film director there since 1975. And what was cool was that was my film school. I mean, we made a new film every week. We shot on film like 16 and 35 when I first started, and even though we were only shooting on a Friday, we would go to the lab, and it was really exciting and fun. And Jim, in all fairness to him, really, he was a really great mentor. He took it upon himself. He made me stand, by his side as much as possible. I'd be in the edit with him. I'd go to color. I'd do mix. So I sort of got a really great education in all of the technical aspects of filmmaking over a long period.
I have to ask, just because you said that you guys were using film. A lot of people aren't used to the film generation. Did you ever have any sort of a lab accident? Anything that wasn't developed properly, and you were suddenly left without the footage that you needed? Because that's something a lot of people forget about.
No, you know what? We didn't. Actually, I had that happen digitally. We had a drive fail on a Red. I had to call the entire cast back to shoot something, and John Goodman.
Do you know what happened? Like, why it failed? Was there any lesson to learn?
No, it took us. We sent the drive back to Red. We got the footage back about 3 weeks later. I managed to retrieve it. But that was a panic, because it was John Goodman, and he'd come and we'd shot the thing, and we'd send him back to the live show to go rehearse, and then our camera assistant sort of sheepishly came over and was like, I can't get the footage, and I went, what to do, and so it was a very quick call, and we turned everybody's cars around, and but at least what had taken 3 hours to shoot, it only took us about 40 minutes because we knew what we were doing.
Right. That's great. That's terrifying. Well, so, I know you also did other comedy shows like Newsreaders with David Wayne and that gang. And I was a fan of that. And of course, Documentary Now was absolutely hilarious. But, going into the Marvel sphere, that's kind of outside of your wheelhouse, aside from you really having a knack for directing comedy and directing actors. Tell us about getting this gig for Hawkeye.
Yeah, it's a puzzle to me. No, I again, it's kind of the dream. I mean, I came out of SNL, and very much kind of felt like I was in that box. And I think a lot of, I think a lot of people who direct, it's you don't like being put in boxes. And so I think a lot of what I've tried to do, when I created Documentary Now, I mean, part of the fun of that was that we went, yes, it's a comedy show, but, tonally it can kind of go all over the place, which was fun. And so I've been trying to take steps in everything I do to sort of make myself more versatile and with the goal of being able to do something, cinematic and of a scale, which is kind of what I got into directing in the first place for. So I did a weird show called Comrade Detective, which we shot in Romania with A24. That was sort of my first little dalliance with action. But yeah, no, I got a call to come and meet at Marvel, and I was confused. And they in that meeting, they told me about the Disney Plus shows and introduced that idea. And
what year was it? Because it sounds like it was before Disney Plus existed.
No, it was right. Like, it was obviously pre-WandaVision. I mean, again, I'm the type of person who has my head in the sand. So those were already, WandaVision and Falcon were already kind of going, or they've been shooting. It was actually right before pandemic hit.
Oh, okay.
I had this meeting. Yeah, and so they introduced this idea of the series and asked me in the meeting if there was a character that I was sort of particularly, if I'd be interested in any particular character, and I said Hawkeye. I just always found Clint Barton a fascinating character. This human guy that has a special skill, but ultimately he's just a real, his superpower is kind of who he is, and they mentioned in the meeting that they're interested in doing it, and we actually I talked about the Matt Fraction run of Hawkeye comics, which I was familiar with and loved that tone, and that's really kind of where that character kind of clicked for me. So yeah, I don't know. I walked out of that meeting. I went into the meeting thinking I was literally convinced that they were going to pitch, like, we want to do a weird short web series, or like something that was like some weird conceptual thing that we don't know if people are going to watch, and you're the perfect person for it. And then I came out of the meeting suddenly thinking, like, oh my God, this is possible. I might be able to do like a Marvel thing. And then I couldn't let it go. So I just started emailing and checking in and on all of those things. And then managed to get an outline out of Trin Tran, the executive, of sort of where they were at. And I put together some notes and sent them off, kind of wincing, sort of hoping that, it wasn't too much or was the right thing. And that led to, then phone conversations and then more outlines and more notes. And it just became this dialogue that well before I was officially hired, I kind of was kind of in this process of sort of just putting, and then I started watching all sorts of references and things and kind of just starting to, fantasize about what the show could be.
It is cool. Wild on the outside because, there's so many directors that want to work with Marvel. They're really at the top of their game. And so it's funny that, of course you thought you were being brought in for possible webisodes and stuff like that. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with those. And you've done some in the past, I know, but that would go way back to a lot of your Saturday Night Live stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, you are a perfect choice because there's a lot of humor to this show. And it was handled really correctly. I'm curious, at what point, or was it only after you got the job that you started mixing with Jonathan and the writing team?
I started, putting together these notes and thoughts, and I would, and I was kind of, I was rereading Fraction and kind of taking a dive on that run and looking at references and listening to music, and then I started watching, buddy cop movies and the 80s and things like Die Hard and all this kind of stuff, and I was just getting, New York police thrillers because the Fraction run has this very sort of gritty New York thing. So I was kind of having all these ideas and getting the outlines, and I was sending notes to Trin, and then there was a certain point I remember when some outlines and or a script or something came back, and I sort of saw at least some of my ideas kind of within the pages. So I don't know how that translation was happening.
That's okay.
But then, I once I got hired, I basically started, working with Jonathan kind of almost immediately. It was just myself, him, and Trin for a few weeks where we started out. Where again, it was kind of I came in with my notes and Marvel delivered their notes, and that became kind of the melding. Was like that we sort of looked at what they had so far and went back and started kind of re-breaking it with like sort of trying to reshape it and tonally kind of start dialing it in and so I worked with them a lot and then other writers sort of beyond that then.
Well, it's going to be impossible to stay out of the spoiler section, but I guess the last non-spoiler question that I would have for you would really be, what Marvel's done is so great because they've given a lot of up and coming directors opportunities, right? That have gotten them out of their comfort zones while relying on what their bread and butter was. Obviously for you, it's directing actors and comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious at a certain point if it was ever discussed how you were going to handle action, since that really wasn't a part of your past resume. And obviously you walking around with an ILM book as a teenager totally shows that, like, you know, you have a sense of special effects, which I'm sure has only grown, and you've used it in your SNL shorts and, you know, all the way through Newsreaders, Documentary Now, and everything else. Was there ever a conversation about just kind of your views and skills of special effects directing and action directing, just part of your, you know, grooming process when they were finalizing if you were going to be hired?
Obviously, yeah, that would be the thing that I'd probably flunk right away if they directly came at me with that. But so it wasn't something that was asked to sort of, you know, are you comfortable? I think, and I kind of just kept my head down. And to me, again, you know, my access point and all my notes and my thinking coming into it was very much character and story and humor. That was where a lot of my notes were coming from. But within that character story and humor, yes, there were action sequences that were kind of starting to get dialed in. And so, you know, and again, the only way I could kind of break those down was to look at them from the point of view of character. It's like, okay, we've got this car chase in episode 3. It's a cool idea, but like, what would make it, you know, it's like Marvel have done a lot of car chases and cool, you know, like they do cool stuff all the time. So what's going to be different about this? And so I kind of, all I could do was come in with a philosophy that I could pass on to the stunt teams and to the VFX teams. And as we started developing it, you know, just like what I think is right for the show and how do we get the most out of it? So again, in the car chase, like, well, it's good if, you know, we're bickering with this confusion over the arrows, he can't hit, you know, like all of those little details that sort of add up to giving an identity versus just cool action. I mean, obviously Bert and Bertie did an amazing job then. Once you know, it became that wonder as well, sort of added this other layer to it. But yeah, it wasn't a discussion in terms of like, do you know how to do this? And I kind of just avoided. I was hoping no one asked me that. But part of the fun of directing and almost everything I've done, like you never know how to do what you're about to do almost every day. Like you've never done that scene before. And so, and action's kind of the same way. It's like, it's editing, it's tension building, it's storytelling. And so you kind of, you know, you just have to sort of try and block out all the other scale stuff and keep your head down and you know, and yeah, focus on what you feel like the salient points. And again, to me, a good action sequence is not, you know, again, I've seen great, obviously the Fast and the Furious does insane scale things, and John Wick does crazy hand-to-hand fighting. And it's like, I never kind of came in with like, I want to do that. To me, a good action sequence is like, if I can remember, if there's a funny moment in the middle, not necessarily funny, but or if there's a character moment, emotion, whatever it is, like the story at the core of it is like that's the fun. And then if you can combine
I totally agree. I mean, the best action through character is always the way to go. And what you were saying earlier is another good example of why you're a good pick as a director, in which, as you said, like, you're not scared to get outside of your comfort zone. There's no way to know how you're going to handle everything. It's really about that fluidity in the moment when you need to change courses, you know, if something isn't working, rather than, you know, keep trying and wasting everyone's time if it's not. And that's definitely an important part of directing.
That was something I learned at SNL. Like that's your sort of, you know, SNL 101, because you know, you're often shooting things in a day and it's got to be a certain standard, and you might be working, you know, it's like you do a Wes Anderson piece and you've got Ed Norton, who's part of the Wes Anderson stable, and you know that Wes Anderson's going to watch it, and you're under that gun. And so there was never any time on SNL to like start a scene and sort of realize halfway through, like, shit, I've gone down the wrong route, and now we got to stop. And, you know, like and so you kind of, yes, that is something, ultimately, that's the thing that saves you is you just got to keep going.
Well, it is impossible to keep talking to you without talking about spoilers. So podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, if you have not yet seen Hawkeye, we're going to start talking about the first 2 episodes, which Rhys directed, and then the finale. So if you haven't seen those episodes, you're going to want to press pause, go watch them in Disney Plus, and of course, come back for the rest of the conversation. Okay, you know, we're going to just start, you know, easy as we get into it. You were talking before about Matt Fraction, and he's listed as a consultant on the show. So what was it like to work with him and hear some of his input? Like, what were some of the things that you gleaned working with Matt, who's just such a comic book icon?
I mean, yeah, he's an icon. So it was just amazing to have a document this you know, which, again, it to me, it was something that predated working on the show. And I held in such high regard, and then to get to talk to him, and because he really did create a very specific version of Clint and Kate, and this dynamic, and he's a very thoughtful guy. He's a super funny guy. His brain kind of goes off in a million different directions at once, and yeah, just it clearly just has this tone down so well. So yeah, again, it wasn't like a day-to-day thing at all, but once in a while, just checking in or pitching an idea or seeing what he, do you have a better solution for this type of thing, whatever it is.
Well, actually, that's a good question. Was there a note that you remember Matt giving that kind of was a light bulb moment for you?
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it's such a long journey that it's hard to remember specific things, because then there's different moments and different challenges. But no, I mean, again, it was just sometimes just, like structurally
running ideas past him, probably.
Yeah. And like the character arc, like what he felt like was important, what each character was getting out of the other one. And that, yeah, again, it's just sort of that subtlety of like looking, again, below the page and like, what are we really trying to do? And sort of trying to understand. Sometimes it's just nice to have that conversation. When you're in it, you don't know all the time if you're doing the right thing. So be able to turn to someone like Matt Fraction and just ask him, like, what do you think? Are we doing this right?
Yeah,
that was it.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting because you said one of the first things that you did kind of as your audition per se was giving notes, right? Mm-hmm. You were kind of giving notes. Well, now that we're outside of that spoiler section, we could talk about it. Do you remember some of the early notes that you gave of maybe just even a light course correct that you thought maybe helped get you the job? Just an idea that you maybe threw out there, or something else? I
think a lot of it was, and again, I have to add this for anyone who's not familiar with the process, but like the writers, God bless them, take the first stab at these things, and it's very easy for someone like me to come in and look at it with a bird's eye view and sort of come up with incisive notes, because I didn't sweat trying to figure out the initial thing, so I have to credit that. But a lot of it was just looking at ways to get more out of the character, maximize the dynamic between the two of them, make a sequel. Maybe there was an idea for a sequence, but maybe it wasn't firing on all cylinders because maybe the setup wasn't quite, just maybe there were a few more little steps to the setup that could make it just that much more interesting or exciting. And so a lot of my notes were just kind of around that, just looking at the shape of it, and on top of that, just gradually getting more and more enthusiastic and realizing what you could do with these characters and the textures, and like watching things like, Leon the Professional and marrying that up with Braxton, going like, okay, well, what if, it's like, instead of doing this big thing, why don't we make a small character moment out of this? And it's because it's that much more funny. Again, it was a lot of like grounding. I'm a logic. Again, I think coming from sketch comedy, where comedy writers they're very funny, but sometimes a lot of the work I had to do on SNL was sometimes trying to find a narrative structure for the film pieces, because the film pieces specifically, you couldn't just put a joke, and like it had to have a beginning, middle, and end, otherwise it felt weird. And so a lot of my work was often trying to go, okay, this is really cool, but like now we got to try and like round off the edges and give it some shape, and so it's turned me into a bit of a kind of the logic police, and I really do kind of attack story and like quite a lot, and get hung up on loose ends, and if something's not quite set up properly, and so again, it was a lot of that stuff that I came in with, and then I think Rogers and I already had the job, but like things like the musical and trying to figure out, because we were puzzling for ages about how do you get Jeremy into the story? Because Clint technically he should be at home with his family in Missouri with his family for Christmas, and that was the initial iteration, was that he was there, and so a lot of the first episode was kind of trying to explain what he was up to and where his head was at, and then trying to get him to notice this thing happening in New York and then travel to New York. And it was like a lot of steps. And so, that was sort of an early part, was how do we kind of get that going in a way that's still satisfying, but, and that's sort of where that musical thing kind of came from.
I love Rogers the musical, and that was a perfect way to get him into the story. But what's even more interesting in that respect, and what's one of the things that people I think really enjoy about tuning into Marvel TV is that the unexpected, they could expect the unexpected. So when you're turning on a show called Hawkeye and it's starting with a little girl in her house with, her mom and dad. You're like, what is going on exactly? At what point was it really clear to you that Kate Bishop was going to be such an important part of this show? Because it's completely welcomed and, was done absolutely great. It had like a whole, Leon the professional, somebody older training, somebody younger in Leon and the professional to be an assassin. Here, Kate by no means needs training because she really has the skills. It's just a little guidance that she needs. So at what point did that become such a prevalent thing from your memory in building that great first season opener?
The Battle of New York opening, I think that was in there when I came on, and so I'll credit Jonathan Igler with that, and Kevin, and in all fairness, Kevin Feige really, that was one thing I learned, was that he definitely values trying to look for the unexpected. I think he gets very excited when when you can kind of steer things in it, or introduce things in it in a way that maybe people aren't expecting. Because obviously they've done a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows at this point, so there's a lot that they've done, and so I think anytime you can kind of do that. But no, Kate was always the entry point, and which I thought was again super smart, because it's kind of a shortcut in some ways, because you're when you start anything, those first 20 minutes of anything, or you're always like the most welcoming audience. That's the best moment, and so I think starting with her and letting her land and in such a way was super smart, and finding that balance with Clint and like weaving his story in. Then I don't know, it felt more efficient and easier, I think, starting it that way. Because Clint does have a lot of backstory. Like we've teased so many things over the years with his character that you could easily spend a long time kind of fleshing out all those details. But they wanted to hit the ground running. So.
Well, it's great because, this integrates so perfectly with everything that's been going on with Marvel. People forget that it was only about 5 months ago that Yelena was introduced into the MCU. So for her to become, one of the perceived antagonists on the show, in which she's hunting Clint, was also really perfect. And I'm curious, again, you were just mentioning working with Feige. He is a true visionary. And I'm just curious, at what point they were explaining to you the plot line of Black Widow before anyone else could see it, because you needed to know by the time you're filming it. And then the integration of Yelena, because I thought that was just a genius move.
Yeah, no, I read an outline with Yelena in it and didn't know who Yelena was. Like it was sort of, okay, what's this? And so, I think it was literally I think the first week after I got actually officially hired, I got sent wherever the cut was at that point of the movie, and the tag was not there though. When I saw it either. So that was like a kind of slightly delayed addition to my purview as well. But
right, her getting the assignment to hunt down Clint.
Yes, exactly. So that needed some explaining for me as well. But no, that was something. It was like we always knew we were going to work towards that character at that specific episode. Like, that was the interesting thing, was again coming in at the moment I did, when the scripts are sort of still quite fluid and the outlines are still being worked out. The one thing that we did have were these sort of anchor points throughout which is a little archery term there, but throughout the series that you knew sort of, again, Maya, we get a full introduction of Maya into episode 3, and Yelena is going to come at this point to that. And so no matter what you did with the story and sort of start tinkering, it was kind of, you were always trying to do it just so that it kind of slotted into that model.
Okay, totally geeky question, but just got to ask it because why not be geeky? There's that thing in your second episode, in the first episode, when he looks down in the bathroom and he sees this graffiti that says Thanos was right. Yeah. Which is a crazy thing for somebody to even write, but it translated again into Spider-Man No Way Home, even, which just opened this past weekend, in which there's people saying Mysterio was right. What were some of the things that you guys were talking about? Is it just to kind of show that there's always that division of, somebody as absolutely crazy and evil as Thanos is still going to have a fan or a cheerleader out there, and no matter what. Yeah,
it feels real. No, it feels very real. I mean, that's the world we live in. It's it's interesting. You watch the reactions of this show. It's like you're never going to please everyone, and I think obviously, politically, sort of where the country is, it's sort of we're sort of used to this kind of push and pull. So, it felt just very funny to me it was funny because I think there was the joke that Thanos was on a mug at some point later in the series, but to me, it just sort of appears there. But to me, the funniest spot was always like it should be again at the musical, and then it would be written in some graffiti by some, So I threw that in there when we did that scene because I just felt like, well, that's the place, and Jeremy, and it should be a moment for Jeremy to, like it's the absurdity of his life. It come between the musical and that moment in the bathroom, like that's Clint Barton's life.
I absolutely love Rogers the musical, and I was so glad in the finale, because we're in the spoiler section, that there's an extra tag of it for a full performance of one of the songs. And I'm just curious, how far did you guys know you wanted to go with it? Was there ever a plot where you thought you might have more than one song or anything else? Or was it really just going to have to center on that one song?
It was always going to have to be the one song, purely because, these shows, as opposed to the movies, they're we shot very fast. So yes, unfortunately in our schedule, I mean, our line producers probably would have killed me if I'd suggested commissioning another song. So were
you able to direct that because it was in the first episode? Was that something you directed, or did you bring in one of those companies that's known for shooting kind of Broadway productions as live action?
I shot it, but we it was interesting because again it was an early, it was something that made its way into the script, and and then it was there, and I kept, I've done musical, I've done live stuff, and like I did John Mulaney. I worked with John Mulaney on a few different things that sort of this ilk and musical and
Spider Ham.
Yeah, exactly. And so I kept, as soon as I was like, well, guys, there's a lot to figure out here, and we need, we got to get a composer going, and right. We got to stage it, and it's theatrical. It's not, our crew's not going to do this. This is a whole different thing. And we got Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, which was amazing. That they're sort of fun. That's when you're a Marvel, when people like that pick up the phone. And developed it with them. It was we just got on the phone once in a while, and Mark would text these very funny lyrics, and he and Scott were cooking up and little bits, and so it started evolving that way, and we'd kick ideas about what that could be and staging, and then I bring in, obviously I don't do choreography, so I handed, I'm gonna have to look up his name because I'm completely.
But you brought in a choreographer, which makes sense.
Brought in a choreographer, yes, Josh. I can't remember his last name right now, but yes, and so then we cast it, and he set to work, and I would go and watch once in a while and check in, and then it was like this slow build throughout the season that this was getting worked on, that was getting worked on, and then one day we all, like the crew and all of us, just sort of landed in the theater, and there it was, and we got to work.
As a theater geek, I was absolutely in love with it. So kudos to you on that.
Good.
I want to get people a little more insight into your creative process. So for directors, there's nothing more important than pre-production. It allows you to do all the planning that you need so that by the time you're on set, the accidents that happen can be dealt with, and you're not dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff that you could have solved in advance. How much time would you say you had for pre-production before you stepped onto the set?
I want to say it was about 12 weeks or so.
Okay. So but again, 12 weeks of prep?
Yeah, but I was soft prepping. Again, the writing meetings and things started, and conceptual meeting. Like I was doing a lot of prep from LA. So 12 weeks in Atlanta on the ground prep. But I'd been, in terms of, because I was involved in, designing the costumes, for the soup, Elena's and Kate's and all that kind of stuff. So those meetings, the concepting, starting sequence meetings on things like the big effects moments, like the Rockefeller Center or the car chase, all those things we'd start pre-vising quite early.
Well, I was going to ask about that because, that's your first iteration of directing before even rehearsals. You're pre-visualizing what's going to happen with low-end computer graphics and storyboard artists. How long would you say something like, for instance, the car chase escape took to previs?
I mean, it was an interesting process because, again, it was my first time. I've worked with storyboard artists before, but yes, it starts with it starts with the board artists, and those are the early sort of conversations. And again, they have some wonderful artists that they work with regularly that are so well versed in sort of what's been done, and of such fans that so they're additive immediately. You start talking to them and they've got ideas and think, and so that starts evolving that way. And then at a certain point, it's like we've taken that as far as we can with the boards. Now, that moves over to the previous guys and then those guys at third floor also, work on all these things. So then they're an additive layer as well. So again, you can kind of come in with philosophies and central ideas, and then they will always inevitably come back with more than what you talked about. and so it's so the process. I mean that I can't. It's hard to put a specific time because again, some of them would start, and then we'd all go away, and some other sequence would get worked on, and then they'd come back to that. And it was all it's all sort of schedule dependent. So. But Bird and Birdie, I know on that car chase, there was obviously cars in general, like a pain in the ass to shoot. And so there was a lot of sequence meetings and to constantly just kind of keep beating and figuring out like what, because we also were shooting in Atlanta on streets that didn't necessarily look like New York. So how are we going to do that? And what's the visual effect? What's the practical effect? Because we also, again, this show, as compared to some of the other Marvel shows and movies, they're all human characters. They're real people with limitations and physical limitations of humanity. And so that was a key thing I feel like with the visual effects was, just do our very best to try and keep it feeling as practical as possible and as real as possible and grounded as possible, not to get too fanciful. So, and that was a little bit of the journey with the prevising, where it was sometimes kind of reining it in. It's like, because again, they could show you these really impressive shots where the camera's doing crazy stuff that, and to me, I just, sometimes it was like, well, it's cool, but to me, I like the way that, it's like, if it's really simple, like that, because I just want to see them fall and hit and that's it. And not, it's like the moving camera, it takes you out of it sometimes when I feel like when you don't know, it's like, whose point of view is this? It's an interesting process for sure. You get to play.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. We just published our winter issue, our brand new issue. It's a Dune cover. There is so much stuff inside. I hope you check it out over at backstory.net. You could see our table of contents. You could read the magazine on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And I'm really happy with this issue. And of course, we also have an archive of our previous issues. Right now, it goes back about 2 or 3 years, and we're adding new of our older issues to it. Just takes a little time. So there's a lot to discover at Backstory. And look, if you're interested in showing your support for independent film journalism, we would love to have you. And to sweeten the deal, I am offering discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And you could use that code at backstory.net, and your login credentials for backstory.net will also allow you to sign in on the iPad app as well. And you could even buy Backstory as a gift for the storyteller in your life. So you have a lot of options over there. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering. Of course, I also hope you will check out today's sponsor, Coverfly, over at coverfly.com. Coverfly is an incredible resource for connecting great scripts and writers with industry professionals. To date, hundreds of screenwriters have met their manager or agent through coverfly.com. And these writers have also gone on to write for Hollywood companies, including Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So if you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished script, be sure to check out coverfly.com. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with director Rhys Thomas about directing the pilot to episode 2 and the finale of Hawkeye season 1. It's always fun to hear about left turns. What was something that you remember as maybe just an effect or a sequence that you guys really wanted to do, and you probably were planning, storyboarding a couple of weeks of it, and then you just completely abandoned it? It was either time, it was budget, it was schedule. And it's always interesting to hear about those discarded ideas that for 5 minutes, we're going to be a part of this show. What was something you remember like that?
I mean, the Rock Center sequence in general had many iterations because, it was like you sort of knew that you wanted to start here and get them down to here. And So there was lots of like little mini things within that, from crazy trick arrows to, to trucks and things invading into the plaza, people breaking into the building. There was a lot of fights, that, again, sort of showdowns, sort of the Kazi and Clint fight that you see in inside the Rockefeller Center sequence. There was a much more elaborate version of that where Clint's sort of taking on all of the TSM. And I mean, that was actually a sequence I was kind of excited about, because it was sort of, you got to see there was, it was like going to be sort of a sort of a version of almost Ronin like Clint, where he was going to be stealthily sort of moving through this office and taking out these guys. And then finally sort of showing Kazi, and it was cool. It was super cool. But in the grand scheme of the whole episode, where you got so many things happening, it felt like a long segue, like a long way to go. And ultimately, you just needed to get him down onto the ice rink and sort of get that going. So, that was one. I'm trying to think of there's like a whole location. I mean, actually, as episode 3 as well, there was a sort of much more in the toy store. There was a thing written involving a big Ferris wheel type affair that just proved impossible to
too expensive.
Too expensive and big, and ultimately, do you need it? I don't know.
How long did you have to shoot each episode?
Again, day wise, it's hard to think how it broke down, because again, some episodes had long sequences in them that required a lot of work, and then were quite simple, So, but I want to say, I feel like somebody told me it was like 17 and 20 days or so an episode. It was like what it ultimately.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the whole thing was basically 98 days. And then, we sort of break that down into 6. And we had a second unit, obviously,
right,
as well.
And they were going at the same time. And, of course, kudos to you, because it should be mentioned. I mean, everyone knows it, but you were also directing during a pandemic. And, that's no easy task. And it's really meant a lot to the entertainment community when shoots are able to go off successfully, because production was shut down for so long. What were some of the things that you learned about as a director directing during a pandemic? I mean, obviously, masking your crew around speaking cast and making sure that everybody is safe, and split up into different zones, I know, are some of the things they did. Tell us some of the tips and tricks that you learned, in being thrown into the fire for this, because I think it's important for other directors to hear how it really works.
Well, what's interesting is, it was an interesting adjustment. It was new. But yes, all those things you said in terms of masking and face shields and distances and, capacities on set. We had a very, we had an amazing team that, ultimately you kind of were there to just make sure that we were safe and they would check and make sure that we're all. And so that, again, it was the first few weeks. I remember it was sort of, this face shield, like people couldn't hear you. I'd go over and talk and I'd have to shout because to get through the face shield and everything, and you realize that people can't see. I mean, the big thing is that people can't see your full face. And so sometimes if you're coming over to talk to someone and you're trying to explain a nuance or you're trying to explain a moment, and, automatically to communicate, you sometimes do the thing with your face, or you try, or smiling, or I might seem more serious than I might come over and they can't see that I'm smiling. They can see my eyes. And sometimes you'd realize because the way they'd react to something I said was like, oh, I feel like you didn't quite understand what, or that came across badly. But at a certain point, it just became normal. That's kudos to our sort of safety team and all that and the way that worked, because you just it just becomes, I don't know, it just became, that was like, oh, this is how we're doing it. And it just became the way we're doing it. And you forget about it after a certain point in terms of that it doesn't become it doesn't change anything ultimately in the end.
Was it important on some of the scenes that you had to minimize how many people could be in the scene? Because it was interesting. You had all these parties, you had the auction for the items recovered from the complex. So you definitely had scenes full of people. Outdoors, I noticed a few people wearing masks here and there that probably, were part of their character, like the LARPing scenes, like some of their masks could serve a double purpose. But did you have an aversion to scenes with a lot of people, or was it because your health and safety divisions were just doing such a great job that you were afforded that luxury? Because you definitely had a lot of people in some of those fight sequences and the party in the finale as well.
No, it was tricky. It was being judicious about where you pointed your camera, and you just we had those limitations and try and came at it all as responsible as he could, and they were very strict about like, this is how many people can be in this space. And, so sometimes it meant shooting for a certain period of time, that you might, it's like you can do, in these little bunches of time, and then everybody needs to step out and, and get some air, and we had to clean, it was like, again, we tried, obviously just trying to serve the reality of the situation. So it's a party, it needs to feel full. And again, you can do that sometimes by layering people. So it might look like there's a lot, and you shoot things on a longer lens to sort of stack it. I mean, the sort of one scene that I think felt initially when we were shooting it, I was like, oh, this is not enough people. This looks scant. Was the gala before the auction, sort of when we meet Kate, that was the one where, I was sort of like, would have been nice to have some more people. But ultimately then in the grand scheme of things, just watching like, well, it's a fancy party. And,
yeah, it totally works.
Free drinks, and it's fine.
Well, so, the biggest spoiler, because this ties into the finale, and obviously once you know this, I would think that it reverse engineers the way that you approach the character. People are trying to figure out who's the antagonist of the show. At first, it might be Maya, she appears in the end of your second episode. And then we wonder if it's Jack. And then we wonder, is it just going to be Elena? And these are all technically obstacles. But if you really decode it, and by the way, red herrings, which is always fun as well. But if you decode it, it really is ultimately Eleanor, her mom. Right. And you don't want to tip your hand, but I'm sure if I were to do a rewatch, you would be able to pick up on some additional moments. So what was the challenge of maintaining that as a secret, but also not making it be so out of left field that it seems like a cheesy soap opera, where suddenly somebody that you never suspect is like, I was the bad guy all along, because it really does work. And like any good villain, they really think the reasons why they've done these bad things add up, when of course they don't. So tell us about that reveal, and especially, the smart reaction that Kate has to it, of what she does by calling the police on her own mom. Because it was a really nice capper to the way the season was flowing. And you really don't exactly see it coming, although I had some suspicions. What were the challenges for you?
Yeah, like you said, it's like we knew that we wanted, you want the red herrings, and where your bad guy is, and you don't want to do the thing, like you said, where it's kind of this out of nowhere reveal, and at the same time, it's no fun if it's signposted. So ultimately, it was, I think, understanding the character. It was really just kind of, and for Vera, I remember it was making sure that you just understood her, her motivations, like what Kate means to her and her values, and it was that sort of language that would kind of come through in certain scenes of the way she framed things, her reactions to Kate's behavior, her sense of responsibility, and pressure, and kind of just to start, so you just want to establish that the character is capable of that. And like you said, it's sort of when she lays out her reasons, they're misguided, but you understand, by that point, you understand that it makes sense for her. Like, ultimately it's like, you believe what you're saying, like it's true. And Kate, of course, we've seen her go on this journey, I think, of learning through Clint, the cost and of doing, being a hero, and responsibility, and all of those kind of things, sort of maturing, to the place where, she, that she as well has kind of learned that there's a line that you don't cross. If you're going to live this life, you've got to hold a certain line, and that's what she does. There's no exceptions.
There was a great moment because, of course, you're also bringing in Kingpin into the canon, and you're using the same actor who I absolutely love, who's portrayed him before, so that was beautiful. And of course there's that great standoff between him and Maya at the end, and we do hear a gunshot, but we do not see what was happening in that scene. Do you want to tell us other iterations of that scene, or anything that people might come to expect for season 2, or was it really just meant as kind of a cliffhanger that maybe we'll get back to later?
It was a cliffhanger. It was always going to happen off camera, but she puts that gun in his face, and yeah, so there's something decisive about it too. That was always that iteration of the scene. You sort of to close her story, in some way, and yes, we've just introduced him, so it's a shocker when it happens, and I know some people are probably frustrated with it because it feels like so it is shocking.
I mean, it could go either way. As fans know, Kingpin has had miniguns pointed directly into him, and he survived in the past, and he might have the jump on her, and you just never know, and you don't show it.
Exactly,
So
you never know. I mean, that's the beauty of Marvel too, is that now the multiverse exists. Anything can happen.
Right. And there's no finality of what happened in that scene either. So
exactly.
Some people will assume that Maya's dead. Some people assume Kingpin's dead. Some people assume that, he was able to knock the gun and it went off and they both scrambled their own separate ways. There's a million different outcomes.
There's a million
and we saw none of them.
No, and exactly. And yeah, essentially, tune in further down the line to see what, if any, the answer was or not. So,
here's the interesting thing about you as a choice as director, because as we said it, at the topper, you have a comedy background, but especially for this finale, there was a lot of serious things going on. And of course you were working with some of the finest actors, which will never hurt a director. But I got to say that you definitely rose to the challenge as well, because the emotion and the drama that was evoked from these characters, especially in the finale, was really resonant. And part of it relies on the inherent backstory in Marvel. Everything that Elena is going through is bubbling up in that scene with her and Clint, and it was great. Everything, though, from this series, from what Kate is going through, which is only contained into the series, is coming to a head with her and her mother. So what were some of the tips and tricks that you learned as a director for directing drama, which was a little outside of your wheelhouse, but you did it very fluidly? You didn't overcompensate. You really gave the actors their times and their moments to let the scenes breathe. So what would be some of the tips and tricks you would give other comedy directors doing drama for the first time that got you through it so well?
That's interesting. I mean, I think it's the same principles. And I think my taste in comedy, I find committed comedy the funniest. Again, we're sort of talking about Eleanor's motivations and making those, sort of earning them. I come at comedy the same way. It's like, joke's not funny to me if it comes out of nowhere. Like the character's got to believe it. You as an audience member have to believe them when they do it or say it or whatever it is. And I bump when something feels, and documentary now, like a large part of documentary now, what we try to do is it has to have a reality. You have to understand, why is this film being made? Why are these people in this film? Why was this left in the edit? If this is a documentary, why did they put this moment in? And so you can never get too broad. And so,
and just anybody listening in that doesn't know, Documentary Now is a show that is really mockumentaries that kind of mock the formula, but there's serious moments for them as well. And you have to create a reality that's believable, or the whole thing would seem too goofy. And Documentary Now perfectly worked because the tone was kept serious. So I guess that's a good way to say
it's a part of that. And I think that's the thing with drama. It's like, it doesn't feel that different in that you just have to create a situation, where everyone's comfortable with what the reality of what they're doing. The writing, some of it was sometimes, you rehearse the scene and there's certain things that don't ring true that, in those moments, and it's sort of knowing how to edit that, as you go and help the actor, sort of find that natural place and what's true to them. And I think, I'm sure many more talented people than me have said this before, but, or the Coen brothers, like the casting is, sort of 90% of it. And it is, when you've got these actors, your job is to essentially kind of just set the table for them and give them that time to breathe and to work through it. And just know, it's like, and I'm aware, I've had my moments where I've definitely gone in and kind of overcorrected or tried to noodle too much. And that's the lesson sometimes, is like, it always kind of backfires. Like, if you go
really, do you want to give us an example?
Well, and not necessarily, Hawkeye, but I think, Actually, I mean, I've seen it. I saw it a lot with writers on SNL sometimes, because it's like they would hear it, they'd written a joke and they'd hear it a very specific way. Like, this is the way it has to be. This is the way when I wrote it, this is how they said it in my head. And they would sometimes go a little crazy, like they'd be like, why isn't he saying it's not right? And you'd go, and, so of course you can't go. It's like people say, don't give line readings. It's like you could go over and you can try and nudge them towards it by giving them something else or whatever it is. But yeah, if you put too many things in their head, it just starts falling apart. And again,
and you're right. Actors do take offense when you give them a line reading because they feel like you're telling them exactly how to do it. And most
they're not
actors
acting
don't
anymore.
Like that.
Yeah, because they're not acting anymore. They're thinking about, like, okay, now I'm saying it the way that you told me to say it. Like, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I'm just saying a line that you told me to say. And so it's like you have to kind of understand, I think, when you can push and when you can pull, and when somebody needs help, or when the help is going to overwhelm them. And that's the thing that can happen, is you can kind of, it's like we're all fragile, and a film set is a fragile place. There's a lot of egos exposed. If the actors are putting themselves out there, I'm putting myself out there and asking them to do certain things. And so it's always like a fine balance of that you got to try and keep everyone's confidence up, feeling good, and you got to be stern when you need to be stern. But it's a game. It's personality management is ultimately sort of what it is, and self-esteem management. And so, yeah, you might not get the exact thing that you necessarily, pictured when you read it, but
sure.
But yes, just kind of knowing, I think sometimes, like, well, this is what it's going to be. This is what's right for this actor. This is what's right for the way they see the character. And you got to sort of trust that and use that. And
well, you're doing these episodes in a 6 to 9 day period. I'm curious how much rehearsal you have, because you're always moving fast. And yes, you could argue that you don't need that much rehearsal. And yes, you could argue that, of course, second unit is handling some of the big action moments. But how much rehearsal did you get, if any, for some of those really big moments that are happening in the finale?
I mean, yes, it was fast, but
was there any rehearsal?
It wasn't like rehearsal. It wasn't a rehearsal period where we went and rehearsed somewhere else, and it was always kind of on the day. You walk it through, and yeah, there were some scenes that you start walking through, you start reading it with them, and questions come up, that you realize, like, oh, this line doesn't really ring true, or I don't understand why they're saying this and he's saying this, and why is he not? And so, yes, we would have definitely, I always try to give it the time that it needs, because, again, you try and rush it, you're just going to end up shooting a scene that doesn't work. And so sometimes you would definitely be kind of flying close to the sun in terms of, like spending a lot of time rehearsing because it wasn't sounding right. But then again, once you get it, or once the actor understands it, and once we're like, it becomes a lot easier to shoot. So that was sometimes the sort of time that you put in the bank. So yeah, it was always on the day, but
that makes sense. I mean, look, like Haley and obviously Jeremy Renner, they're both Oscar nominated actors. So, I mean, that they're going to bring it when it's time, which totally makes sense. I guess kind of finding one other thing on your directing journey, and I know we're running out of time, but just a few last questions. There is the concept of directors who use second unit for action. And there's a group of professionals that range from stunt coordinators to practical live effects that are able to handle that. But then some directors, they get into the action sequence on those moments that concern, the top talent for their big close-up moments in the action sequences. Sometimes that too goes to second unit, and sometimes it doesn't. How did you manage second unit for directing Hawkeye?
I mean, it was all kind of that way. I would.
So you would do some of the action for like their close-up moments.
Yeah, I would do anything, and again, in the name of trying to get it right and make it look good, and because we had someone like Jeremy and someone like Haley and Florence, who are all physically able and one is I would, and if you look at a lot of the action, there's performance. It's not just long fighting. It's like a lot of it does have dialogue and what have you. So I ended up doing quite a bit because it was like it just had to be them. And so then you get greedy and be like, well, Haley, can you do can you do these 3 moves that lead up to this? And if you could do this bit that comes out, that'd be great too. And we would just kind of go again as much as time allowed. I would get as much with them and that they were physically comfortable with as possible, and then whatever was kind of left you'd go over to second unit. And I mean, obviously we had meetings beforehand where we try to break down, well, this is definitely second unit. This is, you don't want to spend time doing this, and they're going to be better at doing this and that. But most of the time they follow. There are a couple of instances where there was always a balance trying to figure out who goes first, because there's an efficiency.
Right. I was going to say, you're using the same sets and space between stunt performers and on-camera talent. So would you sometimes come towards the end of a shoot after they've gotten the moments that they've needed, and then you've hit the insert moments and the script supervisor is there to show you the match frames that you need to match?
It was interesting because I think we tried both things. I remember my AD was a strong, he sort of come up through a lot of the Marvel movies, and he was a strong proponent of the efficiency of letting second unit kind of lay the groundwork if it's a fight, and then exactly where it's okay. Now this bit's where they're going to go, and you could, but we were going so fast that sometimes I'd have to shoot the scene, the very next day. And so there wouldn't be that much time to really actually look at what they did and understand. And, you didn't have an edit yet. So you didn't really, and sometimes Jeremy and Haley, they might have different ideas about actually I would sit, it's like, I don't feel like, what the stunt people have done. I feel like I would stop here and I would do this and that. And so it became, I think, more usually I would go first and you just try and work out, again,
they would fill in the gaps to meet what you were doing.
And I had an amazing stunt. Again, our stunt coordinator, Hattie Moneymaker, and her sister was Haley's stunt double, Renee Moneymaker. They were really good at, they knew those sequences so well, and they kind of would already have spotted, okay, this is where I think Haley can take over, and this is where and we've trained her, and we think she can go this far. And so we would work together just to kind of massage those bits.
That makes sense. What was the kid in the candy store moment for you? The kid that walked around with the ILM book. What was the special effects moment that you were really happy with, that you were able to get involved with, having been such a fan of special effects your whole life? Because especially in the finale, there's a lot going on with running down the sides of building, an entire Christmas tree falling, and a lot of other special effects too that are exploding and whatnot. What was one of your favorite effects that you got to be really intimately involved with?
That's a great question. Okay, well, actually, it's funny because I had my kid in the candy store moment very early on when we just started. Where there was an email that was sent to all of us, basically saying that ILM had been, they'd been sort of confirmed as the main vendor for Rockefeller Center and actually for the Battle of New York bit at the beginning of episode 1 as well. And it was just that to me kind of exploded my brain. I was like, well, ILM, I'm working with ILM. They're doing my thing. And I actually responded to that email thread that Kevin and Lou and Victoria that were on with the anecdote about my ILM book. And they were all very sweet responding to that. But dropping that tree in Rockefeller Center, and like you said, going down, but all that plaza stuff, just what I love about it is that I worked at Rockefeller Center for, through SNL for about 12, 13 years. And I watch it, and there's really there's nothing that bumps me out. It's amazing.
They would have that, that extra resonance for you because you work there. You know the space.
Yeah. And so, and again, to me, my favorite type of VFX are kind of are the invisible ones where it's it's actually the trick is the fact that we didn't shoot that at Rockefeller Center, and that the ice rink was not underneath that tree. It was actually over there. And this was, and those moments where you actually, all that kind of comes together and it looks real. And that's super cool. But yeah, at the same time, I remember prevising the Battle of New York at the beginning, and that sort of moment when we sort of she walks out and you see the Battle of New York,
right?
That moment. And then I remember when the previous first came in, they cut in the Avengers fanfare when Jeremy sort of jumping from the building. That was definitely kind of a sort of uncanny valley moment, because again, it's I like everyone else has been a fan of these movies for years, and suddenly you're seeing a moment from those movies in your own that you're working on and you're opining on, and the music's there and everything. It's just, you suddenly realize I'm in this universe now. It's quite thrilling.
I'm curious, editing is the last stage of storytelling. What was something important you learned about your episodes through editing, and especially if there were scenes that had to be cut out?
It's pacing. It's funny. Like I said earlier, I'm quite, I get quite hung up on logic and story, and sometimes, and I think a lot of directors probably do this too, is that, you spend a long time sometimes shooting a moment that you think is is completely, intrinsic to this point being made or this being understandable. And what Marvel were very good at, that I just had to sort of relax into, was essentially, again, scenes that I shot, moments that I shot, that they were just like, you don't need it. And I'd be like, no, but it doesn't make any sense if you don't see them go from here to here, or she doesn't see that. How are we going to end? And they would just go like, let's trust us, it's fine, And again, and I honestly, like, I was wincing when when the show comes out, you're like, oh, people are going to miss that thing that doesn't make any sense. But you realize, like, they were completely right. It's like, just sort of that there's a language to these shows and these movies that people know and understand, and there's a pacing that they're used to, and they can fill in more blanks than you credit them with. And I again, it was a sort of a lesson in kind of trusting.
There wasn't a specific scene. Like, you don't remember a scene that you actually had to cut that didn't even end up in the show?
Oh, plenty of scenes. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff we
Is there anything you think people would find fascinating as a cut scene?
Well, I mean, the other auction scene at the beginning, I wanted to be this big heist. It was a big heist, basically. It was like, you're going to see the Tracksuit Mafia getting in position. They're getting to the kitchens of the hotel. There'd be a guy dressed as a waiter. There was basically like a classic, like Kate's in her own world following these guys, and then everything's unfolding, unbeknownst to her, and the audience are getting to sort of see this build up. And I felt like it was key, because I was like, I didn't want it to come out of nowhere. And we shot a lot of it. Ultimately it became, she walks out and the thing explodes, and then we go. So that, there was an abruptness to that took me a moment to adjust to. But it's fine. They're right. It's like, you don't need all that other stuff. It's like, to me, and for the longest time, I fought so hard to shoot it. I was like, no, it's good. Like, this is what a good sequence is. This is what it needs to be. And then there's stuff in the setup in episode 6. There's a wonderful scene at a sporting goods store where Clint and Kate go to get supplies before they build their arrows, which, it was just sort of a charming reality moment again, that he doesn't have the compound to go and get his supplies. There was sort of something manual about, like, it was like the A-Team. They're just going to get basic things. And which to me was like a moment of breath and levity before all the big stuff goes down. But yeah, you come out at the end of the day and you're like, we didn't need any of that stuff. It's like, you just got to get on with it.
Well, right. Good storytelling has a fluidity to it. So you don't want to get too bogged down in the details. And you're right. Of course, you could assume that they know that somebody went to a hardware store somewhere to get those special arrows parts. So you don't need to show every single detail of them. That makes total sense.
It's a subjective thing too. It's like, we all, again, I sometimes enjoy those like really mundane moments and things, because it's like, it speaks to you, but yeah.
Well, so what was your toughest scene? What was your toughest scene looking back? The one that you really were sweating and you kept coming back to over and over in your mind, or maybe something logistically went really wrong on set? And how did you rise to the challenge?
I mean, Rockefeller Center was easily like, as a general sequence, it was like just a lot.
Outside on the ice or inside running through the offices?
Well, it was logistically, from a geography standpoint, of just like where everybody is, how do they get there, and the reality of that, and how does he not hear this happening, and how does she not, like all those little things of just like where someone is at a specific moment and how do they connect. That was something that just was a lot of working and reworking. And yes, the ice rink as well. Like, you got these hordes of people coming down on Clint and Kate, and sort of the logic of that, and how that works, and trying to keep it fun. And
I just want to reiterate what you're saying. It is very important for directing to have a good sense of geography. If the audience doesn't know where characters are in the room, you can't cut around it in the editing room. You could tell that the director was lost. So having a good sense of where your characters are, where the antagonists are coming at them from, and setting up that geography is ultra important.
Yeah, it is, and yes, it's jarring when you're suddenly like, wait, what? And because you feel the edit, you're like, you sort of, I'm like, I missed something, and then the other thing is that we have all of these storylines tying. Like we had Clinton and Elena, Maya and Kazi, Kate and the boss, and then Kate and Eleanor,
which was a perfect way to cross cut tension.
But it was hard. And my hats off to Tim Roach, my editor on that, because it was like we were constantly kind of reworking, trying to figure out sort of what those crossover moments were, and who, again, who do you highlight when, and how, and who should get the final bit. And so yeah, that was just, it was just tough, because again, you've got a lot of threads that you got to try and tie up, and you don't want it to feel rushed, and you don't want it to feel too convenient. And again, I'm not saying that we did it perfectly. I'm the type of person.
Actually, I thought it was a great finale. I really loved it. Was there anything that you needed to reshoot? It's very common to have reshoots. You just realize in the edit you need something. Was there anything that needed to be reshot?
It wasn't reshoots. It was additional stuff. Just again, stories, things. Yeah, pickups that we realized. That just
what was an example of that?
It was funny. There's a lot of just like surgical bits and bobs. Clues, like sort of Jack in the candy wrapper, and just like little dialogue bits.
Jack and the Candy Wrapper was a great misdirection point. That was great.
It was like little things like that. Again, there was so many, and just lines of dialogue that you just realize. Like, I mean, I guess that could be maybe considered reshoot. Just a moment, like, oh, just she mentions this instead of that. That would But again, Marvel are really, really good at that as well. Like they will, they'll look at it and work it, and we sort of arrived in additional with a really clear idea of like all these moments.
Well, great. It really means so much to me and to all the fans that on Wednesday, the 22nd, the day your finale came out, you were able to jump on the horn with us. Is there anything you want to tell us about that you're working on next?
Well, funnily enough, I just got off a call about season 4 of Documentary Now, which is the polar opposite to Marvel. But it felt like a nice palate cleanser to go and do something really silly. So yes, that is immediately next. I'm going to go and do that at the top of the year.
Well, I think you definitely proved that you could walk through the fires of the MCU, because you came out on the other side looking fantastic. I absolutely loved this first season of Hawkeye. Rhys, thanks for being so generous with your time, and congrats on a job well done.
Thank you. This super fun to talk to you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Rhys Thomas for being so generous with his time and chatting about what it took to direct the pilot, episode 2, and the finale of Hawkeye season 1. Of course, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Coverfly.com. They're an incredible resource for helping connect great scripts and writers with industry professionals. To date, hundreds of screenwriters have met their manager or agent through Coverfly.com, and these writers have gone on to write for Hollywood companies like Universal, Netflix, CBS, Amazon, and Blumhouse. So if you're an emerging screenwriter with a finished script, be sure to check out Coverfly.com. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We published our winter issue, and I'm quite proud of it. There is so much to explore in it. You can check it all out over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or via our iPad app, Backstory. Heck, you could even test drive us if you've never read us before, because we have an entire free issue for you to read. And when it comes down to it, if you like what you read when you test drove us, I'm happy to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel support my passion project. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to reach out to me, you could always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_mag on Twitter. I also run those same accounts on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith on Instagram or Backstory_mag on Instagram. I have a Facebook fan page that I check sometimes. You could also reach out via email to backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I'll respond as soon as I can. That email box gets a little clogged sometimes, but I always love reaching out and responding to people who write in. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.